everybody. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Elizabeth Taylor, and I'm the Chief Exec at ERSA. We've been considering the whole relationship between homelessness and work at ERSA for many years now, and we've done it in various different iterations. But one of the things that really struck me back in February, when I went to a round table that some others on the call attended with Eddie Hughes, the Minister for Rough Sleeping, was that the sector really needed to look at our provisions, what we deliver, how we can better serve people who are at risk homeless or at risk at homelessness or in vulnerable housing, and that we should learn from the housing sector, and that we should learn from organisations within our membership and our sector who are delivering programmes now. So we have had a secure homes and work forum for some time, and I just felt that it was time to kind of press refresh and reboot that agenda. And so this morning's event is very much a response to that, and we will then have a regular schedule of secure homes and work forum meetings, which we will invite members to come and share their good practice and build that community of good practice. But thanks to Amy Kimbangi at St Mungo's, we met when we finally were out in the real world a few months ago, and we talked about this event and who we could invite, and between us we contacted people and lined up the speakers for this morning. So I think it's a really good start. A couple of people we'd hoped to join us this morning aren't able to. Ollie from House of St Barnabas is ill, and Clarion Housing are having some huge IT problem across their systems, but we'll get them both back at a future forum meeting. So those of you that are ERSA members will know that Cognisoft sponsor this forum. We have various associate members of ERSA who sort of attach themselves to particular forums and activities. So I'm just going to invite Nicola Castle from Cognisoft just to say a few words, and then we'll move on to the formal agenda and start with Adam Rees from St Mungo's. Okay, Nicola.
Mute.
You're on mute, Nicola.
There we go. Can you hear me now? Yes, fantastic.
Yeah, we can hear you, Nicola.
Yes, fantastic. Good morning. My name is Nicola Castle from Cognisoft, and I'm the business development here at Cognisoft. For those of you that are not aware of what we do, Cognisoft provide web-based case management systems to employability and skills providers, and that allows them to be able to record evidence to support the work they're doing with their clients. Now, the Cognisoft system has been used to support a wide range of employability style programs. We've been delivering now for maybe 20 years plus. So we work with organizations that deliver programs such as Restart, ESF programs, LEP funded, GLA, pretty much any funded or non-funded government contracts, if you like. And I think we've been sponsoring this forum for probably about 4 years plus now. And the reason why we do that is because we do work with a lot within the housing sector, and we believe that the housing sector are really unique in how they deliver employability. And we support the forum because I think the housing sector play a really important role in employability. They have a lot of employability departments that work with specialist service providers, and they offer really good, I personally think, information, advice and guidance to clients to get them job ready. And I think the reason and the key to their success is the fact that they already have that relationship, and a really good relationship with the clients, because they're already working with them in housing services. And that's what I think is the key to their success in this forum. And but thank you for listening to me, and we hope we all enjoy the sessions today.
Hey, thanks, Nicola. So if we can go over to Adam Rees, who's the Service Director at St Mungo's, who's going to talk to us about their exciting and innovative work. Thanks a lot.
Well, yes, thank you, Elizabeth, thank you, Nicola. I don't think I'm going to talk about the exciting stuff. I'm going to set the scene of, I guess, who we are, kind of the what St Mungo's is, but more broadly, I guess, what for us the homelessness sector looks like, pathways and things like that. A lot of people will know that, but some people might not. And I guess I'm going to set the scene of partly what has not worked in the past, I guess, and then I think a little bit about what we're looking to do, and then my colleague Amy is going to touch on a bit later of the exciting, innovative stuff. Elizabeth, she gets all the, like, I'm bad cop, she's a good cop. So I think Amy's got the presentation. Just I guess I've worked for St Mungo's for 26 years this November. So I've been in the sector a long time. I've seen a lot of stuff. I cover an area of London, and I used to do the southwest, where I have all of the services there. But I also lead on our education, training, and employment within St Mungo's, so across the whole piece. Amy, you able to bring up the presentation? Or not? Yeah. There we go. Brilliant. So just very quickly, thank you, Amy. So it's St Mungo's, our vision is that everyone has a place to call home and can fulfill their hopes and ambitions. And we look at doing this in three ways. We're a doer, we have lots of services, and I'll go into that briefly in a little bit. So we're providing a range of different services to support people, prevent them from becoming homeless or rough sleeping, but also a lot of the time working with people who are rough sleeping and coming into housing. And primarily we are a housing association charity, a mix of that really, with doing some other stuff around the side of that. We also build relationships with communities and wider public, and so our aim is to drive understanding around homelessness and empathy within the wider public. That's a big part of what we're trying to do, and work with partners around that. And then we're advocating for policy change. So we are, and that's why we're keen of working with ERSA, keen to be on our roundtables with Eddie Hughes, Elizabeth, and to say this is what we need to change things and use our client voice to do that. So very briefly, this is from 2021 during the pandemic, so people get an understand of the scale of the things we're trying to do. So we were working with around 30,000 people across the year. On any given night, we have about 3,200 beds where people are living with us, and in a year's, and our outreach team are pulling many more people off the streets, putting them into assessment centres, or directly helping them to leave the streets, about 10,000. We run about 207 services. We're across London. We started in London, but we're now across the southwest and the southeast, with a very small centre in Leicester, in our journey into the East Midlands. And we're providing mainly accommodation outreach, but we work in prisons, we work in hospitals. And during the pandemic, we housed about 4,000 people over, this is 1 year. So we ran about between 20 and 25 hotels during that period. So we're working to prevent homelessness in all its manifestations. So people might know this, but I just want to give a brief, I guess I want to give the context in which we're trying to get people work. And I am absolutely passionate and seen the light around work, which I'll go into a little bit later, and the importance of work for people in terms of their recovery. But the context in which we're trying to do that is still a fairly standard homeless pathways that we're dealing with, where people are coming in from the streets or referred from the council, from prison, from hospital or hospital discharge, They're either coming into an assessment centre, which is a very short turnaround, sometimes 72 hours, sometimes 28 days, up to that. Then it's not always linear. People are not always being moved into different areas as it looks like on the slide, but we're running a lot of 24-hour complex needs services with staffing on site. People are moving then into shared accommodation, but still with staffing, onto more self-contained accommodation. So a lot of stuff that is coming through the GLA, supported in London, but more widely, that's the plan. So people are going into council accommodation with housing associations, or much more into the private sector, where you can get that in certain cities. They get a little bit of floating support, and then on to independent accommodation. And that's, for as long as I've been here, that's been we're looking at housing, getting you more independence. Usually people are locally connected to the area and they're in receipt of welfare benefits. There's a little bit of provision for those without no recourse to public funds, but that has really dropped off now in the changes to legislation post-Brexit. So in that context, and this is a survey from a while ago, 30% of our clients were saying we want to work. Then if you look at our statistics, and this has slightly gone up, only 3% were. So I just want to explore a little bit of our learning about why that has occurred, and sort of put the context for the changes that we're looking at that Amy will describe later. So part of that is people's experience that work was insecure at the lower end, 0 hours contracts. It was transitional. People were dropping in and off of work. That was affecting their benefits. That was affecting housing benefit. And when housing benefits affected, your tenancy and your tenure is affected. And so work being insecure played, and that became not necessarily a myth, but that permeates through supported accommodation. I think that work isn't a particularly secure thing to have if you're trying to maintain accommodation. People living in supported accommodation, it's busy, 24-hour sites, but even in semi-independent sites are busy. People have 24-hour routines. There's other distractions, and you're in a culture where very few peers are working. So it's a challenge to be someone who works. We've often had the culture, and within staff and within our model, that you've got to be work ready. You're stepping up to be work ready. You have to achieve all these other things around health, housing. You have to get life skills. You have to have general employability before we will get you on. So there's a lot of hoops to go through, and that for our clients has proved to be quite demotivating. And it's also not seen as a priority. It's not been a priority in commissioning necessarily. The employment as an add-on often. Health and homelessness and housing has been a priority, and the performance management of employment has been, I would say, in my opinion, weak. And I think also on the other side, the structure of employment services and the offer has not always been as strong as it could have been, and understanding the context of homelessness services. So there's sometimes been an expectation that generic staff can get employment outcomes, and I think we've been definitely guilty of this, of bidding for things and saying we'll get these outcomes with our normal staff, and the evidence doesn't support that generic staff with other things that are going on, without that expertise around employment and brokering jobs and having that relationship, can drive high employment outcomes.
Oh, nice.
Service design. I think we've designed services so sometimes at one size fits all. You'll approach a service and say, well, either everybody can work and get the same thing, or nobody can work in here. And actually, it's much more nuanced than that in services. Of a 30-bed project, some people are ready to work and they want to work. Some people don't want to. And it's being able to be targeted in that way. And often excludes those in complex needs and substance use get excluded. And our experience is those individuals sometimes can work. And as I said before, we've put a lot of jumping through the pre-employment, being job ready, getting job ready. And that can I've had services when I first started taking over this, which had been getting people job ready for years. And that is very demotivating for the individual because the outcome that they're looking for never arrives. And when I go into projects, I do see lots of programs. There is lots of programs. There's little programs. There's bigger, wider national programs. Particularly through the pandemic, I think this is, possibly more the case. But I see a lot of leaflets up around things. And when I talk to the teams, I think how many of these are we engaged with? Not that many. Referrals are often off-site. The support can be off-site. And employment is not always joining up with housing, mental health, substance use services. So that's some of the learning, I guess, that we've had over the years about some of the provision. And I would say some of the work and employment and training offers haven't necessarily been joined up with each other either. So everyone will know this in the room, but I just want to articulate, I guess, why work matters to our clients and why we want it to be front and center of what we're talking about in our services. And it goes hand in hand with addressing your health, addressing your relationships, and getting you, good accommodation. It isn't a nice to have, and it isn't peripheral to the main job of housing. Good work, and we're talking about good work here, where people have sustained employment and it's good quality work with fair pay, is financially liberating. People's choices on benefits are narrow. Their housing choices are narrow. The areas they work in are narrow. Work opens that up. Good work and work where you start to get paid more and more opens up. It's financially liberating. It's financially liberating in your life as well, not just around housing. So I said it expands housing choice. And good work, I've seen this time and time and time again, and people on the call will know this. It builds positive identity. It builds a sense of achievement. It feeds into people's well-being. It occupies time in a way that is positive for people. And, it might be controversial to say, but it builds functional relationships with people who are peers in work, and they don't. When you're in accommodation, you're not always having homeless accommodation, not always having functional relationships. There are quite dysfunctional relationships. There's often, there's people are exposed to violence or to abuse or things like that. And I'm not saying you're not at work, but to really understand the context in which some of these projects, even if they're really well run, operate, work can transport you out of that. And working gives purpose and direction away from homeless services, because genuinely people don't recover fully in homelessness services. They recover when they come out of services and they're in the community. That's where you fully recover, and work plays an integral part in that. So our approach, which Amy is going to deal with in more detail later on, but we are pushing for and going for and have set up now evidence-based model to support people with complex needs based on the IPS. So Amy will go into this, we were involved in a little pilot around IPS, and we've now started to employ that in different centres across our services. So in this, employment specialists are integrated into homelessness services, and you have employment conversations from day one. And we're fully joined up, immersed with the housing, the mental health, and the substance use support. And what we're really keen on doing, and this isn't an overnight thing to do, is to reverse the traditional narrative that people experiencing homeless can't or shouldn't work. And it's not providers who say that necessarily, but it is a culture within a lot of our services, I would say, that that has over the years has become embedded in that, and we really are on a mission to drive a change in that. And we a really strong commitment that with anyone can work if the right job is sourced and the job they want to do, and right support is provided within that job, that people have someone who walks alongside them and supports the individual, but supports the provider of that employment as well to make it work. That is me. Thank you for listening. And I don't think we're doing questions, Elizabeth, are we? Or we're moving on
No,
to
we can do discussion at the end. If anybody has any questions for any of the speakers, we can do that later. But thank you very much for that. I went off screen so I could squint closer at your slides, so I don't want anybody to think that I was rude and doing something else. I find it a bit hard to multitask on Teams sometimes. So thanks, Adam. Perhaps we can now move over to Nick Bartholdi, who's the Evidence and Data Specialist at the Centre for Homelessness Impact. So over to you, Nick.
Great, thank you, and hello everyone. I'm just going to hope that this works. Just open the share tray and see this comes up, and hopefully you can see my slides. Yeah. Oh, sorry, 1 second. Yeah, can still see my slides? Brilliant. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm Nick Bartholdi, and I'm an evidence specialist at the Centre for Homelessness Impact. So I work primarily in our research arm, so understanding the evidence base for homelessness interventions, with the aim of understanding what works to improve outcomes for people experiencing homelessness. We also commission our own trials to expand the evidence base. So today, I'll be briefly talking you through the data around homelessness and employment, and what the evidence suggests about which employment programs work well. So we know that loss of employment can cause homelessness, but homelessness is also a barrier to remaining employed or regaining employment. In 2020-2021, of those households owed a homelessness duty in England, 13% had a household member in full-time work, and another 13% were in part-time work. And this demonstrates that the premise of that being employed necessarily prevents homelessness is flawed. Nevertheless, 41% of people experiencing homelessness were registered as unemployed, and 14% were not working due to long-term illness or disability, while only 3% were retired. And just as a comparison, the most recent UK unemployment rate was estimated at 3.8%. And despite the low employment figures amongst people experiencing homelessness, evidence suggests that the majority of people do want to work. There's also clear evidence, as kind of noted earlier, that good work is beneficial for health and well-being compared to unemployment for almost everyone. However, it's less clear that cycling in and out of low-paid, insecure, precarious employment is good for health and well-being. This can often be the case with programs targeting households to re-enter the labour market, who may experience delays in entering employment, low pay, part-time work, or becoming unemployed again. And we know that people who are street homeless are even less likely to be employed, particularly if they're UK nationals. So of those who responded to DLUC's rough sleeping questionnaire, 93% said that they were not currently employed. It's interesting to note significant differences between UK nationals and non-UK nationals in this respect. Only 4% of UK nationals experiencing street homelessness were employed at the time of asking, compared to 17% of the non-UK sample. Non-UK national respondents were also more likely to have been in employment within the last year compared to UK national respondents, at a rate of 57% for non-UK nationals compared to 21% for UK nationals. And this difference may point to increased vulnerability of non-UK nationals to street homelessness if they lose their job or don't earn enough to pay for accommodation while working. And this is likely to be, at least in part, due to the greater difficulty of non-UK nationals in accessing welfare benefits. So there are a few main government programs aimed at helping people who are either long-term unemployed or at risk of becoming unemployed. And I mean, you'll know that most of these aren't focusing specifically on the barriers for people with experiences of homelessness, but are for people generally furthest from the job market. So England and Wales have the Work and Health programme, while in Scotland, the Fair Start Scotland programme has a similar function. The Kickstart scheme for young people has also been running in England, Scotland, and Wales. And across the board, and I'm sure people attending the event will have a lot of insight into these statistics, we see less than ideal employment outcomes achieved. So around 20% of participants enrolled in the Work and Health programme and in the Fair Start Scotland programme achieved a job outcome. A job outcome here is defined differently for different programmes, but generally means achieving sustained employment at a living wage. Unfortunately, we just don't have good evidence for interventions in this space that are highly effective for people experiencing homelessness. We do, however, have evidence for an intervention which has been tested for people with mental illness. And I'm not going to spend too long discussing this now because I know Amy's going to be talking us through it after I wrap up. But it definitely deserves a mention as a really promising and evidence-based intervention in this space. So individual placement and support, or IPS, is an alternative to standard train and place programs, which focus on training people first and then aiming to find them opportunities. Instead, IPS places people directly in employment and supports people from there. And there's robust evidence supporting the effectiveness of this program for people with mental illness. A European trial across 6 countries, including the UK, found that around 55% of IPS recipients were employed over the trial period, compared to 28% who were enrolled in train and place programs. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more from Amy about piloting this program in the UK for people experiencing homelessness. It's something we've been hoping to see for a long time now. There is also some evidence, albeit of limited reliability, that personal job coaching can lead people into employment and that it may be beneficial for some people compared to generalized approaches, such as the Work and Health programme. The evaluation of the National Lottery and ESF-funded Building Better Opportunities programme identifies beneficial service components, and these include trusted relationships, services provided in familiar places, flexibility to provide bespoke and tailored provision, and inclusion of specialist partners. And all of these are potentially on offer in the voluntary sector, but there's a dearth of evidence about their costs and relative effectiveness at improving employment outcomes, especially sustained employment outcomes offering a reasonable income. So the truth is that we don't have enough robust evidence telling us what works to help people attain and maintain employment. Some key interventions that should be evaluated more robustly on top of IPS include job coaching, interview training, and CV training. And we need to know how effective these programs are at getting people into employment and helping them to achieve a good standard of living. Another intervention we'd love to know more about is wage subsidies, like those provided via the Kickstart scheme. These have the potential to be transformative, but we have no evidence of their effectiveness for people experiencing homelessness. There's a lot we could learn from this type of work being done with young people. On the bright side, the evidence base is growing rapidly. The Centre for Homelessness Impact built a tool that systematically maps out all robust evidence of homelessness interventions. And one key lesson that we learned from the map is that half of all robust evidence around homelessness interventions was published on or after 2015. And while the overall number isn't as high as we would like, the number of robust papers measuring the impact of employment interventions has almost doubled in that time. This is really promising, and we hope to see this trend continue. UK-based evidence is seeing a similar trend. However, we're still producing too many kind of reviews of the evidence base and still produce very few evaluations. Randomized control trials, which are seen as the gold standard for evidence in this space, are still very rare in the UK. And we hope to see more of these produced to fully understand how well interventions work in our own context. So to summarize, employment programs are not evaluated frequently and robustly enough for us to make many kind of substantive claims about some programs being more effective and cost effective than others. However, there are lots of highly promising interventions we'd love to test and trial, which is part of what makes today's event so exciting. Additionally, as you all know, people at different distances from the labour market require different programs and solutions. So we should be testing different interventions for people with similar characteristics in that regard. And finally, we're getting better at collecting solid data and evidence to tell us what works, which can only be a good sign for the sector and for people experiencing homelessness. Should we hold the discussion for the end, you mentioned?
Yes, unless anybody wants to come in now. That was really great, Nick. Okay. Can't see any hands. So shall we move over to Amy from St Mungo's to talk about piloting IPS in homelessness services?
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. I'll just share my screen. Okay, hopefully you can see both me and my presentation. So I'll proceed on that basis. Great, fantastic.
Yes.
Hi everyone, I'm Amy Kimbangi. I'm Senior Service Manager for Employment Services at St Mungo's. So in my presentation, I guess I want to build on what both Adam and Nick have already shared and tell you a little bit about what we're doing or piloting within our homelessness services at the moment, which we do believe is a step change in employment support for people, particularly people coming away from rough sleeping and homelessness. And we are implementing, as Nick has referenced in his presentation, the IPS model, so the individualized placement and support. So I just want to share a few learnings from that, what we've learned so far and what we're hoping to do in the future. So now there we go. So we have been piloting IPS in homelessness services now for coming up to a year. I'd say we're still in pilot mode. We'll stay in pilot mode for as long as we can because it allows us to test lots of different things. And what we're doing is we're putting employment specialists delivering an IPS model into a range of different homelessness services. So we've got employment specialists in street outreach teams. So that's people who go out onto the streets to engage with rough sleepers. We've now got employment specialists working alongside them. We've got outreach teams in assessment centres, those sort of first ports of call that people come into when they come off the street. We've got employment specialists in hostels, so the 24-hour complex needs provision, and we've got employment specialists in semi-independent accommodation. Now, as Adam shared, that can be a linear pathway that someone goes through all of those different types of accommodation, or it can be that people, different cohorts of people, access different parts of that pathway. Certainly, all those services are quite different. The context is very different. The setup and size of the service is different. So we're learning a lot about what it means to do employment work in those different contexts. Now, what I'm probably not going to do today is a detailed rundown of what IPS is and how it works. I'm going to assume there is some knowledge, or in some cases, extensive knowledge in the room of IPS. But I'd certainly be, willing and enthusiastic to talk to anyone outside of this meeting who wants to talk more about IPS and how it works in homelessness. But I'm going to try and speak to a slightly broader audience and talk about some of the features of what we do and how that is beneficial, we believe, in the homelessness context. But for those of you who understand IPS, let's say in the mental health sector, we are taking homelessness services to be our host services in the same way that traditional IPS uses primary or secondary mental health services to be the host. So that's kind of how it's working for us. So our employment specialists are working in a multidisciplinary way alongside other professionals who are supporting the people that want to get into work. So primarily that's housing, key workers and support workers who are working within these services, but we also work alongside mental health workers, substance use support, and often the probation service as well. We have a really strong focus, and I'm going to talk more about this later because it's one of the key learnings, on aligning job entry or progression into work with housing move on and welfare benefit support. And I'll expand more on why that is key. But I think traditionally, as Adam highlighted, employment support, even when it's been provided by homelessness providers like ourselves, and all the more so perhaps when it's provided externally, has often sat separately from the work that happens to move someone away from homelessness services and into their own independent accommodation. And that, I think, is one of the biggest barriers to engaging clients in the first place and to making work a really beneficial thing for them. And so it's absolutely key for us that employment and housing move on, welfare benefits are all delivered hand in hand, and that the person at the centre knows that the various workers working on the different parts of that are working together to make sure that the plan for their life is one that is going to be supportive and sustainable for a life away from homelessness. We're really focused on what we call a place then train approach. So just very briefly, in case that is jargon to anyone, the traditional approach that we would have applied until quite recently would be that we would be supporting people with various, often quite long programs of pre-employment support before we think about actually searching for a job for them. Following the IPS or supported employment approach, we are now starting to talk about actual job opportunities for people from day one. We're starting to talk to employers about clients and how we can match them into suitable jobs from day one. And our focus is on helping people into mainstream work in the shortest appropriate time frame for them. Now, there is a lot that I can say about that because it's a voluntary program. People come to us because they want to work. So ultimately, we are helping them to achieve their personal goal. We're not saying to people that you have to work if you don't want to. It's all about helping clients achieve the goal that they've set out for themselves. It's also not necessarily about finding someone a job next week if that's not appropriate for them, but it is about focusing on the job outcome and looking at what specific job that person wants to do and how we get them ready for that job in the shortest possible time frame. Employer engagement is really central to what we do. I'll also talk a bit more about this. Our employment specialists do employer engagement themselves. We don't have a separate team or a separate staff member who does that, and they do it on a client by client basis. So the client work comes first, identifying, understanding what goal the client wants to achieve, and then directly approaching employers that match or align with that client's goals, but also their skills, experience, and what they can offer. Critically, we're seeking what we might call mainstream competitive jobs in the open labour market. We don't work with sort of job lists or set aside jobs or job schemes for people experiencing homelessness. We strongly believe that going into a, what you might call a mainstream job, a normal job, the types of jobs that we all do, is what is really going to be supportive of someone moving back into a more independent and sustainable lifestyle as they move away from homelessness. And so we work individually with employers, and it's really about finding that good match between employer needs and employee needs. It's not about going to employers and saying, can you really help this person because they've been homeless? It's about seeing the person who has been homeless as a potential valuable employee and helping to advocate between the employer and the client to get those really strong matches and move on into work. So what have we learned? Well, we're still learning a huge amount, but I just wanted to share with you some of the key things that have come out even over the last year. I should also say, off the back of what Nick shared about the need for evidence, we are at the beginning of designing and commissioning an evaluation of our work. So I don't have statistical evidence to share with you today, but we are hoping to have that in the near future because the early signs are that this approach is promising, and we want to make sure that we're robustly evaluating that so that we can be talking about that in a more evidence-based way. But what have we learned in practice? So I think the first thing, and this has been talked about already, but I've controversially called it the myth of work readiness. And the reason that I say that is I think the culture or the belief of lack of work readiness amongst people experiencing homelessness is so strong it can't be overstated. And I think it permeates but both, I would say, homelessness and employment support services for this client group. There is a very, very strong focus on the reasons why people who have experienced homelessness perhaps are not ready to work yet, That might be because they don't have a secure home. That might be because they are still using substances or still in treatment for using substances. It might be because they're still managing or learning to manage a mental health condition. It could be because they still have conditions attached to their probation. It could be a number of reasons, but there is a very strong focus on why people cannot currently work and the things that they need to do before they are ready for work. And I think, and it is controversial to say it as a myth, because I fully understand that people do need to be prepared for the specific job that they're going to take on. But I think, as Adam shared earlier, what we see is really pervasive for this client group is the idea that there should be long periods of generic pre-employment preparation, which frankly never end in a job. And what we see amongst our clients, and I can think of real people in my head as I say this, who I saw years ago who wanted a job and now tell me they don't want a job because working is not for them. And that's what they've internalized from the sector and from the professionals who work with them. And frankly, I think it's a tragedy. And so I think what we're finding now is that there is potential to start people in work quicker if we can provide the right support and if we can do the right work with employers and with other support professionals around this to challenge expectations and assumptions. So I just want to give you one example. I've got many examples. I'm trying to give you one example of each thing so you can see how this is working in practice. This is a client I met recently in one of our services, who I'm calling Joe. So he was a prison leaver. He'd had quite a substantial prison sentence for a fairly serious conviction. He was released out of prison into a bail hostel where he stayed for a short amount of time. And then he was discharged from there with no accommodation. So as he puts it, he bought a tent and went to the woods. So he lived in a tent, rough sleeping for some time, during which he was supported by an outreach team. So those are teams of homelessness professionals who go out and engage with rough sleepers. He then moved from the streets into an assessment centre, where again, he stayed for a short amount of time while a plan was being made for his housing. And eventually he moved on into semi-independent, so that's supported accommodation of a sort, which is where he still is today. When I met with Joe, my question to him, seeing that he's someone who has encountered a lot of services and a lot of professionals in his time, beginning in the criminal justice system and coming all the way through homelessness services. My question was, when did someone talk to you about work? And his answer was, I wanted to work when I was in prison. I wanted to work the day I left prison, but either no one spoke to me about it, or even when I spoke to them, as in other professionals, about wanting to work, it was dismissed. So he said that people would say to him, you shouldn't focus on work right now, you should focus on your housing. People questioned his suitability to work given his conviction. Essentially, people said, don't worry about work right now, let's sort out some other things. But for Joe, working was central to his recovery and his rehabilitation, and nobody was taking that seriously. And so fortunately, as I of course would say, he was moved into an assessment centre where we have recently put an employment specialist. And even though the staff within that assessment centre themselves were sceptical about whether Joe should work, and that was driven by doubts about whether it would help him gain sustainable housing, they did refer him to our employment specialist. What our employment specialist did was they worked with him quite a lot around disclosing his conviction, how his conviction might affect his ability to work in certain types of work, but also for those types of work that he was able to do, how he could disclose positively or in the most positive way about his conviction, both to his employers and his colleagues. They also worked really closely and quite extensively, I understand, with the housing support workers who were supporting Joe. As I say, they were sceptical about whether Joe should work, and that was driven by a worry that he may not be able to secure accommodation if he was in insecure work and therefore had insecure income. But they did some detailed work with Joe and with his support workers to see what types of work, what numbers of hours, what rates of pay would help him move successfully on into accommodation. And the upshot of that is that Joe is now in work and he's in housing. And for me, I've not spoken to him since he started work. I spoke to him slightly before he started work. But I know from sitting here there with him that day that getting work was going to be critical in his rehabilitation. And the fact that he's now both in work and in housing is the greatest outcome that we could have asked for. But I also know that he's someone who would have traditionally been screened out of programs as currently not ready for work. We've also learned that those barriers to people going into work, I don't want to be too critical about ourselves and our sectors, but I would say there are more barriers within the homelessness and housing sector and the employability sector in terms of whether we think people experiencing homelessness are ready for work. Those barriers exist within those sectors, but they don't exist so much in the minds of employers. Now, obviously, everyone here today will know the current labour market conditions and will know that employers are being forced, if you like, to think more laterally about what types of people they employ and to remove some of those barriers they may have had. So we are in a particular moment. But I think it's also clear when we talk to employers that they make adjustments for all sorts of people and employees in the workforce. And actually, some of the issues that people who have experience of homelessness face are experienced by many people in the workforce. Many people in the workforce have mental health conditions that they need to manage alongside their work. Some people in the workforce are still using substances. Their employers may not know about it. They may be in treatment for alcoholism. They may be in treatment for substance use. But employers don't tend to be anywhere near as fazed by some of these issues as our own sector is. Now, I don't say that naively, because I know that those of us who work within the sector probably know very well how some of those issues can play out in employment, and perhaps some employers don't if they don't have experience of that. But I do think that employers are much more open to making the adjustments needed for clients to manage health conditions, insecure housing situations, caring responsibilities than we often give them credit for. And we've really seen that as we get out there and talk to employers, they're really keen to work with us and find ways that employment with them can work for our clients, but also that they can get a valuable employee. So to give you another case study, a client of ours that I'm calling Alex, he was long-term unemployed. I'd say not long term, but I would say at least off the top of my head about 3 years unemployed and in recovery from alcoholism, which had come on as a result of his experience of homelessness. Previously, he had worked within the hospitality sector and he was keen to get back into that. But as someone who'd spent a number of years in homelessness services, again, he was someone who people said probably not ready to work right now. But he was referred to our employment specialist. They did extensive work with his support workers, with his alcohol support workers around the treatment he was receiving, around the groups that he still needed to attend to support his recovery, and what type of workplace would support him to work and work successfully. The employment specialist then did some proactive work to find an understanding and accommodating employer with the client's consent and talk to them about possibilities for part-time work that would allow Alex to still go to some of his recovery groups, but also in the hospitality sector, an adjusted shift pattern that would mean that Alex didn't come into contact with some of the culture of drinking and alcohol that would set him back in his recovery. So he got a job doing morning shifts as a kitchen assistant, as a kitchen assistant that achieved both of those adjustments. I'm not going to sit here and say it's been plain sailing. I know from talking to our employment specialist, it hasn't. And there are times when things have gone wrong and the employment specialist has had to intervene, or to support the employer and the client to find a way through. But the success story is that the client is still in work. And I think that's testament to the work that was done prior to placement with the employer and the work that the employment specialist is still doing now. And I think from my most recent update, the client is doing very well now in the workplace. And I think if we hadn't have continued to do that advocacy to keep that client in work, then they could have become someone who went straight back to unemployment and stayed there for quite a long time. And the final thing that we've learned is that specialist support around housing and benefits is key. Now, there's a very technical issue, which again, I won't go into it today, but it's in very broad brushstrokes. People using homelessness services are often living in what would be classed as supported accommodation. And that means that they are claiming housing benefit for their housing costs and not the housing element of universal credit. And broadly speaking, the policy initiatives that have been sort of levied at universal credit to make work pay have not been levied at housing benefit. And so people who are claiming housing benefit are not always better off in work. than being not in work. And it is a really, really fine balance, because the last thing we want to do is for someone to lose their accommodation because they've gone into work. And I think when we've really dug into it, this is one of the main issues that drives the idea of lack of work readiness within the homelessness sector, is a genuine and well-founded fear from housing and homelessness professionals that if somebody goes into work, they will lose their accommodation because of the negative impacts on their welfare benefits. So the only way for us to overcome that is to make sure that we're really doing some quite detailed and specialist work with support workers and with clients to look at what is the overall income picture going to be for someone once they go into work, and how is that going to relate to their ability to pay housing costs. To give you an example of some work we did with a supported housing provider, it's not ourselves, but it was an external homelessness housing provider who we were working with. Previous to working with us, I don't know whether it was written or unwritten, but they essentially had a prohibition on clients who lived in their supported housing working. And that was due to concerns that if clients were working, then they wouldn't be able to pay their rent and they would lose their accommodation. What this means in real terms is that people's unemployment could be extended by at least 2 years, because that could be the length of time that they were living in that supported accommodation. So if someone came in, let's take someone like Joe, who I spoke about earlier, if Joe comes into that accommodation wanting to work, after 2 years of being told that he shouldn't think about work now, we can imagine that after that, he's going to feel much less inclined to work and be much further from the labour market than he was when he entered that accommodation. And that, again, is a tragedy and a complete waste in terms of somebody who wants to work and could be supported to do it now. But at the same time, we understand the genuine fears of housing support workers who are up against a quite challenging benefit system. So we worked with the provider to look at different scenarios where we could help people to be better off whilst living in supported accommodation. This does involve some concessions and some that I'm not entirely comfortable with, but I currently can't change the benefit system. So it does involve things like really looking at whether people need to work quite a reduced amount of hours in order not to have that negative impact on their housing benefit. Now that frustrates me, because we have people who want to work full time who can't work full time, but sometimes we have to find those compromises so that people can get into work and keep their accommodation. We also do a lot of work with local authorities around discretionary housing payments, although that pot is rapidly shrinking, to see whether we can use those payments to offset some of the negative impacts on housing benefit. But the upshot of working with this supported housing provider is we now have an employment specialist there with them, having previously been a provider who said no one here can work. They're referring tens of people to us. And that, for me, is many people who previously would have been told they're not work ready or work isn't for them right now, are now actively seeking work. We are also lobbying on the kind of very specific points around housing benefits and supported accommodation, because if we want people who have experience of homelessness to get into work, then we really need to make sure that they're on an even playing field as people who are on UC for their housing costs. So that is something we'll continue to do. But in the meantime, we will find workarounds, because we're not going to wait years for benefit rules to change. And at the same time, there's people in our services who could work and could work now. So just summarize the learnings. I hope this is obvious by now, but we strongly believe that people with experience of homelessness are capable of working if the right job is secured and the right support is provided. But those are two quite big ifs. We've learned that the support needs to be personalized. It needs to be really flexible and intensive. People who with experience of homelessness are not homogenous. They have different, very, very different experiences, and the support needs to be personalized and flexible enough to look at what those experiences are and to join up all the supports around that person. As a result, caseloads are small. Our workers carry a caseload of no more than 25, so that they can really provide that personalized, flexible support to help people cross the line into work. Now, obviously, that has cost implications in terms of those small caseloads, but I think what we're seeing is the numbers of people going into work are significantly higher than what we've seen in our traditional programs. And we want to be doing that work to evaluate and potentially cost benefit analyze the work to say that there is benefit in this intensive work to help people move into the labour market. Employer engagement is absolutely key to what we do. But again, it needs to be individualised. As I say, we don't work sort of wholesale with employers to open up tens of opportunities for people. we find out what job an individual client wants to do, and we engage with employers to find a suitable vacancy for that person. And finally, integration with other support services is vital. Again, hopefully this has become clear, but making sure that employment is right in the middle of somebody's housing and recovery from homelessness, rather than something that sits to the side or something that comes later, is really vital to making sure that people can move on from homelessness and that getting into work can play a key part in that. And that's me.
Thanks, Amy. I can see conversations happening in the chat on my second screen. So I don't know if anybody wants to come in with questions or comments now or wait till the end, but I don't want to deny people the opportunity to contribute at this point. Anybody want to raise a hand? Yes, Donna Mitchell.
Yeah, so we I'm a manager on the Work and Health programme in Greater Manchester, and we have a lot of this situation that sort of comes around, and we have two problems with it. So obviously you've got the supported accommodation element where rent is really high, so the participant can't afford to get a job with like we were saying earlier, with many hours. But the other problem that we have is that there's almost like a conflict with universal credit. So universal credit, you have your claimant commitment, don't you? And that states, as a rule, I mean, obviously it varies, but 35 hours a week, you've got a job search for. So what we find is that there's a lot of problems with regards to if we had somebody who the maximum amount of hours they could work was 9 hours a week. Otherwise, it'd impact the rent that they'd have to pay, and it'd be really, really high. So we were happy to do that. However, Universal Credit came back to us and was saying that's not enough hours. So there's almost like a conflict here, so that they were at risk of sanction. And the other issue that we have alongside that is that the benefits calculators, they don't sort of cover what we need to cover to be able to advise the participants properly. I was wondering if there was anybody who has any sneaky ways around this, or if they know of a better benefits calculator or anything that we can use.
I can comment on that a bit, if that's helpful. Sorry, I'm just having some trouble with my camera. There we go. Yeah, I mean, I recognise both of those issues. So I think on the job centre issue, there's no easy answer, but it is. I can think of times where we've then had to go and do that piece of advocacy with the job centre to have that exact discussion, to say, actually, this person needs to work a very reduced amount of hours, otherwise it's going to destabilize their housing. And we have had success. Obviously, it depends on your work coach, but we have had success in helping work coaches change the requirements for job seekers, because we're helping them to understand somebody's situation in regards to supported accommodation. But I think it is time consuming, obviously, to go to those appointments and do that advocacy. And it's obviously discretionary as to whether those changes get made. But we have seen that happen. And again, it's an awareness raising piece, because I'd say that the majority of work coaches don't understand that tension between supported accommodation and benefits. And so that work has to be done as well. And I think the knock-on impact, as you can imagine, when you talk about the client working 9 hours, we've had someone recently who had to work 4 hours to make working, work for them. And, as I say, that I find that incredibly frustrating, because that person wants to work more than 4 hours, but they simply can't if they want to keep their accommodation. And it's very difficult to find, not impossible, but it's more difficult to find employment that is going to suit those very limited hours of work. But at the moment, we are pursuing that as the only route to help people in supported accommodation into work, whilst also trying to pursue the changes to the benefit system. On the benefit calculator point, we've basically had our own benefits calculator built by Entitled To, so that it helps us to make those calculations. But that's obviously something that we're able to do because we're working very, very specifically in the supported accommodation space. So that may not be applicable to everyone, but yeah, agree that we need kind of bespoke benefit calculators to do these calculations for people in supported accommodation.
Okay, great, thanks,
Thank
Amy. Jacob Hill, I can see you've raised your hand.
Hello, hi Amy. Thank you so much for that presentation. I was just wondering with the benefits calculator, and I've asked the question in chat, so sorry if there's duplication here, but could St Mungo's offer training to organisations that might want to understand the benefits further to really get under the skin of what we need to take into consideration with all of this? And do you ever think that the calculator might become public access at all?
Yep, so we're, I guess, at the beginning of doing this work. So at the moment, we don't offer training externally. We literally had a conversation with someone internally yesterday about whether we should be offering training internally first. But it's certainly something that I think we find, you know, we have our own welfare benefits team internally, and they are fantastic. But there is a very specific conversation to be had about benefits in relation to work. You know, obviously the clients we work with have lots of conversations about benefits, but this is a very specific one. So I think we'll probably come back to you, Jacob, when we're a little bit further down the line. But I think what we're finding is there is a massive need for training around this, and whether it's us who delivers it or someone else, I think it's an issue that lots of us will be experiencing, and some, I imagine, are seeing it occasionally with small, you know, subsets of people you work with. Some people like us are dealing with it all the time, but it's something that there isn't any training about. And so, yeah, we'd certainly be keen to talk to people who benefit from that kind of training, and we can work out how to make
absolutely. And may I ask a follow-up question, Liz?
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you. Thanks, Amy. My next question is that we've noticed that there's opportunities for private individuals through self-investment pension portfolios to get involved with properties. Is there enough social accommodation out there in the UK, in your opinion, or does there need to be more social, secure, or even social or secure housing is more needed in the United Kingdom?
I'll let Adam take that.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, I was interestingly having a conversation with Cornwall, and they cannot get any move on because Airbnb has taken up everything, and so you basically end up with. I mean, I think generally the big issue is we described housing pathways, but people swim around in that supported accommodation, partly because the access out into social accommodation or accommodation with controlled rent, or even access to private rented sector in some areas is very, very slight, very small. And I think that, and as a charity, this is what we're doing. We're entering into that market, to buy into that market, to buy move on accommodation. So I think there is accommodation to buy and to bring into sort of social housing if there are investors to do that. We've had a program called Real Lettings where we've done that. We've had investors buying into, buying up 1-bedroom studios, 2-bedroom flats, and creating pathways. So I think the supply is there. I think people don't want to use accommodation for that because it doesn't have the return that private rented sector has, basically. So, but I don't think the supply is problematic in some areas, but not in others, I would say.
Okay. That makes sense. Well, thank you, Adam. Thanks for that.
Right, thanks, Adam. Deborah Cheney. I'll take one more question, then we'll go on to the next speaker and we'll pick up questions again at the end. But Deborah.
Hello. This is probably just something to consider. I work for a housing association, so a great deal of what you're talking about, personalised programmes, is what we already do. I just wanted to come in on the housing homeless. As you will appreciate, over the last couple of years, we've housed a great many more who were homeless than we had before. I mean, that process absolutely just, accelerated beyond belief. One of the things I'm just going to throw this in the pot, and it's maybe something to think about for another day, is that they were often supported, and I absolutely agree that some of them have done the same programs over and over again because it's a quick fix, and that some of the harder work is the employer engagement, actually finding the roles. But what we've found is when they've come to us as a social housing provider, the support has literally stopped. The door has shut. and we can't get any information. And something that's really, really helpful to us, because we do everything, the money, advice and benefits, the individual support, is that it helps when that provider doesn't shut the door behind the person because they've been suddenly given social housing. And it can help with their, ongoing sort of success in their accommodation. So it's just something to throw into the pot here, that we're doing all this personalised work, but what we find we're struggling with is that we're not getting any information when these people are actually given to us on the homeless register and they're nominated and the door shuts behind them. So it's something to think about for those of you that work with the homeless, that please do talk to your housing associations and housing providers, because actually we want to work with you and we want to help the individual, but it's really difficult if you've got to start from ground zero again.
Okay, thanks, Deborah. I think we could pick that up at a future forum meeting, the whole partnership working thing, which I certainly know is one of the things that Victoria Whittle from Clarion was going to talk about had she been able to join us this morning. But can we move on to Andrea Tudor, who's the operations manager at Business in the Community? We're really pleased to have her with us this morning.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for having me today. It's been absolutely great just to hear everything that's been said already, and I'm hoping that what I'm going to talk to you about now really brings both the Centre of Homelessness kind of points on job coaching and different other elements of how to support people with a homelessness background, but also on what has been already put on the market by St. Mungo's. So if it's okay with everyone, I'm going to share my screen in typical fashion. So fingers crossed it works. Bear with me 1 second. Windows. This one. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see the screen.
Yes.
Fantastic, thank you. So I'm Andrea, I'm from Business in the Community, and I'm here to talk to you about our latest campaign, which is called Opening Doors. So it's BITC's inclusive recruitment campaign. And for the people that don't know who BITC is, we are a national charity. And our goal is to build healthy communities with successful businesses at their heart. So we work with employers, with big businesses and small businesses as well, on their responsible business agenda, on different campaigning elements, on advisory, and ultimately sifting through different programs that we deliver on the ground as well. So we've been around for 40 years. Today is this year is our anniversary year. And we just want to be even bolder and braver than before. So we've come up with a huge ambition specifically around employment called Opening Doors. This whole journey started early last year. And of course, like most programs like this, was generated by the crisis that we live in currently. So it has a COVID element, but also we know historically from our experience in working in the employment sector that it's really, really difficult, as it's already been said, to support people into work when society is broken, really. So last year we launched a program called BITC's Job Coaching, where our ambition is to support 10,000 people to get ready for the new jobs. So to date, we helped about 450 individuals. About 15% of them have gone into employment. And the point of the program is to pair up an unemployed person with a volunteer, a business volunteer, on different sessions to support them into work. But on the back of this, quite on the ground program, we have launched the big campaign that we have about opening up more inclusive opportunities for diverse talent. So kind of linking back into what Nick said about the job coaching and not enough robust evidence, this is what we're trying to build, to see how, really one-to-one support from a business person can help that individual get into the sector that they want, coupled with the fact that we know, like it has been said just now, that there are challenging perceptions around work, specifically for people facing multiple barriers into work, and homelessness being probably the biggest one, where employers need to be challenged on how they support people with a long-term unemployment background, and how they can change their recruitment practices to enable equality and basically make sure that they are as inclusive as they can. So that's how Opening Doors came about. And we are working with all our membership database to make sure that we are breaking down those barriers as much as we can, and we create accessible jobs and apprenticeships. So we all know the stats. We work in the same market. We know that unemployment is, the number of people unemployed over the last 12 months has increased. We have seen an increase in people being unemployed between the 6 and 12 months. We all probably got taken aback at the end of furlough, when actually the unemployment rate that we thought is going to grow, it hasn't. But what we are seeing now is a parity between the number of vacancies available with the number of unemployed individuals. So we're looking at 1.3 million jobs currently being advertised on various forums, and around 1.3 million people looking for jobs at the same time. So what we're trying to do is work with the sector and with the businesses to see how we can actually build that bridge between it, and to ensure that the 1.3 that are looking for jobs actually land the job that they want as quickly as possible. So in terms of the recruitment barriers, we have done numerous forums and focus groups with businesses and with charities within the sector, including St. Mungo's and different housing associations, on what are the barriers that are still kind of faced by the people that are looking for jobs at the moment. And of course, we all work in the sector, so we knew them, but we just wanted to have that kind of in a formalized way that we can share with employers and with the DWP and higher forums. So as you can see, we've got 70% of employers ask about criminal records, which brings into another campaign that we have running at BITC, has been running for about 9 years, which is Ban the Box. We see 22% of business leaders saying that they're unlikely to hire someone with a known disability for various reasons. It's about asking about previous experience when the role is really low level. It's looking into, the young people. We want to support young people, but are they supporting the right young people in this, when we know that, for example, Black young men are actually the most disadvantaged within the group, and so on and so forth. In terms of our campaign, what we want to do is basically rally everyone up and to say, we have 5 core principles that the campaign are going to work, and they're listed on the screen in front of you. Which 3, at least, you as a business can commit to make a difference, a tangible difference today within your recruitment practices. So it's either creating partnerships with connected people, it's either showing that you can be more inclusive, it's focusing on essential skills and capabilities that are needed to do the job. So what we mean by that is really looking at the job descriptions, the essential skills that are needed for a person to perform those jobs. And if the questions at the application stage or in the interview are really necessary to go into, I don't know, tell me what you've done in the last 5 years, when actually all you need to do is sort mail. What we want people to do is basically get behind what we're doing. And to date, we have signed up a lot of businesses, and if they were to recruit tomorrow, we would have opened up 300,000 jobs that are more accessible to individuals that face multiple barriers into work. And what we want in this is not just for them to, sign a pledge and do a little bit of tweaking in the job adverts or something around internal recruitment, but we want them to give us the insights of their journeys, to tell us how they found the experience, how do they identify what they needed to change and stuff. And some of that can be done with our help via the diagnosis tool, our mystery shopper, the responsible business tracker, and other tools that business in the community has under their belt. But mostly we want to basically showcase case studies on how they've done it, to share the best practice with other businesses so they can learn and put that in practice. And then the word spreads and we create a more inclusive society. And everything will end with a flagship annual event. This campaign is meant to last until 2025. So hopefully by then, all our membership and outside of the membership will see a difference, which inadvertently will link into everything that has been mentioned already within this event, in terms of we want employers to know and to make a difference. We want employers to look at people for who they are and what they are and the experience that they can bring, and not put more barriers that are really not necessary within those particular jobs that they advertise. So some of our supporters are here listed, and some of our charity endorsers are listed below. We're always looking for charities to work with, and thinking back at the program that I mentioned, the job coaching, we're always looking for partners to help us and to bring referrals into our program. We do have the ambition of helping 10,000 individuals, so we can't do it without working in partnership. So please come to us if you have any suitable candidates, and I'll also put the link to our program in the chat so you guys can explore it at your own leisure. Now, I mentioned the Ban the Box campaign earlier. it's a long-standing principle. You might have already heard about it, and it is one of the campaigns that we are using to demonstrate the power of how a business can change their practices really quickly and incorporate people with barriers into work and actually make a huge difference. So as the stats say, 1 in 5 adults in England and Wales have a criminal conviction. 1/3 of those people actually claiming job seekers allowance have a criminal conviction in the last 10 years. And actually, most of the entry-level jobs are asking about criminal convictions when actually the job doesn't require that. So we are just challenging the employers on what they can do and what they can ask, and just opening up their ideas around, do I really need to ask this question? These are just some of the concerns that the employers are asking us, and what we come back to. So I think for me is like, my industry regulator won't let me hire anyone with a conviction. So BITC has looked really closely into every single regulatory body and found that actually that box doesn't need to be on the application form. You can ask it later if the job requires it, but it is not a regulatory kind of constraint for any sector. And these are some of the businesses that we have worked with, and you heard of them most likely. For us, probably the going back to, oh, my industry doesn't really allow me around the legal and financial services. So again, we're trying to counteract that, but we cannot do this without your help as well. So in terms of what we are trying to demonstrate today is just an opportunity for the ITC to work with everyone within the sector and outside the sector. So it's not just us working with our members and the employers that we know, it's you probably partnering with us and saying, right, we know this campaign, do you want to be part of it? For us to spread the word as much as possible, to work with as many employers from top to bottom on creating a fair, inclusive employment kind of landscape. But also what I wanted to come here and ask is to say, you're working as well for employers yourself. It doesn't mean that we need to work with the businesses that were stated on the PowerPoint. Is how can your own business look at their recruitment practices to ensure that you are as inclusive as possible? So if you need any support, come to us. We'll love to work in partnership with everyone, and I'll take any questions that anyone has. I think you're on mute, Elizabeth.
Oh, well, you missed me thanking you, so thank you very much. And I was just checking if anybody was raising a hand. Doesn't look like it, but we can always take questions at the end. So thank you very much. Shall we move on to Fiona Kempster from Beam, who's going to talk about their employability and homelessness support? Morning.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Yeah, perfect. Just checking. Great. Thank you so much for having me on this call. It's been really fantastic to hear from lots of different organisations about how we can really increase access of opportunity to different cohorts into the employment sector. And it's been really fantastic to hear, especially from St Mungo's, who we have done a lot of work with over the years. And yeah, really excited to be speaking today. So my name is Fiona. I'm a partnerships lead at Beam. And I'm really pleased to be here talking about employment and homelessness, which is absolutely at the core of what we do at Beam. So for those of you who don't know who we are a social enterprise. We were founded in 2017, and our vision is really to lift people out of homelessness or out of the risk of becoming homeless by supporting individuals into quality employment and into sustainable housing. So we really want to be supporting people into independence and taking them from the point of crisis to the point that they can live and thrive independently. And the key people that are involved in that are local services and the local community. And I will explain how they work together in one moment. So we work across the UK. So we are delivering in 80% of London local authorities. We also are delivering in Essex, Kent, West and East Midlands, Newcastle, and we launched in Scotland and Wales earlier this year. And since we launched in 2017, we have supported over 1,000 individuals. So those are individuals who are either experiencing homelessness or at risk of becoming homeless. And of those that we support with their job search, over 80% find a role and 83% then sustain for 3 months or more. And of those that we support into a new home, 68% do move into a home in the private rented sector, and then 93% sustain. So how we do this, the easiest way to explain is by 4 steps. So I'm also going to look to share my screen and hope that it works. Has that worked?
Yes, we've got it. Thanks.
Okay, that's great. So yeah, here are the steps of our model and how we work. So the first step is that Beam takes a referral, usually from councils or from housing teams or from local services that already have that relationship with an individual. And it's a really easy form. We don't want to be adding any workload to everyone's very busy plate. So super easy form in order for someone to make a referral. Once someone is referred, they are then matched with a Beam caseworker who will really provide one-to-one tailored support. There's lots of relationship building, which I know has been picked up a lot today about the importance of building relationship, building trust. And the service user and the caseworker will sit down together and really come up with a goal, whether that's an employment goal, whether it's a goal to move into a new home. And picking up what Adam said right at the top of the call, we want to be really aspirational with this goal setting. So we really want to be really digging into what did that individual really enjoy? What did they want to be when they were younger? What would they be if money and skill were no object? And once the goal has been identified, the service user and caseworker will come up with any financial barrier that is preventing the individual from reaching that goal. And Beam will then fundraise to cover all of those costs. And I can show you how we do that. But yeah, we can fundraise to cover any cost that is preventing that individual from reaching their goal. So whether that's the cost of childcare, the cost of travel, the cost of a qualification. The other thing we can do, I know it's been picked up a bit this morning about supported living. We can fundraise to cover the deficit, which means that someone can start a job and we can fundraise to cover, say, 4 months rent, which would keep them in their supported accommodation. Alongside that fundraising, they will also then have access to our online community and be receiving really individual and tailored messages of support, because we want to be building up an individual's confidence and self-worth and self-belief. And then we will also be supporting them into employment. So we also have partners with fantastic employers across the country who have committed to interviewing and hiring Beam service users. So companies such as the Royal Mail, Bupa, Ocado, but we also look to create local employer partners as well. So to kind of bring this all to life, I wanted to show you Giulietta. So this is Giulietta. Giulietta is a single mum. She has 5 children living in a 2-bed flat. So yeah, not great in terms of the size. Very, very, yeah, everyone living on top of each other. And it really came to heads during the pandemic when her kids were all trying to access online learning, online schools, and it was very stressful. Giulietta did have a regular job as a cleaner. But again, during various lockdowns, that regular work dried up. Her local housing allowance didn't cover her monthly rent. So without that regular income, she was really at risk of falling into rent arrears, which obviously was a very stressful and scary situation for her to be in. So Giulietta, she approached her local council, which was Hammersmith and Fulham, and they put her in touch with Beam, where she was paired with a Beam caseworker. And they sat down together and identified that Giulietta's key goals was to move into a home that reflected her family size and where her children could really thrive, and also to work in a job that meant that she could pay her rent, that she could be really confident and have that self-worth, have that belief, be a really good role model for her children. And it was clear very early on that Giulietta has this amazing caring personality. She was really interested in becoming a nurse one day. And so it was decided that the best step for her was to start off in the care sector, getting that experience to one day hopefully become a nurse. So that was what she really wanted to do. And if you ever met her, you would know that's absolutely the right role for her. So once the goal has been identified, the next step is to work out how to get there. So every one of our service users has a financial budget that is created. So really breaking down every barrier that is preventing that individual from reaching their goals. So in the case of Giulietta, she needed care training, she needed a laptop, a phone to cover the travel to work, and then also because we were supporting her into the private rented sector, she needed that first month's rent and rental deposit. So once this had all been broken down, Beam will then fundraise to cover the costs. So different to how if I was running, I don't know, a 10K and I put something up on Just Giving and then was calling around my family and friends to beg them to donate, we do this all on Giulietta's behalf. And the other thing that's important to mention is that since we launched in 2017, we have fundraised over £3 million. And those 90% of those donations come from monthly donors, which means we can split them amongst all of our campaigns. So we can guarantee that every campaign will reach its fundraising target. And we're usually able to reach those targets in about 2 to 3 weeks. There's a real goodwill, I think, in society at the moment to support vulnerable people. So we're able to get people financial support very quickly. The other thing that it's important to note is that none of this money is deposited directly into Giulietta's bank account. There would be risk involved to that. It would affect her universal credit. So everything is held in Beam's charity bank account and the items are purchased on her behalf. So that's the public, that's kind of the financial support, but we also want to be building up someone's confidence, independence. There's been lots of talk today, and I absolutely agree with it about how getting that job and stability and routine is really important for people to reach that independence and break that cycle of homelessness. So everyone who joins Beam is able to tell their story in their own words and really explain who they are, where they've been, and where they want to get to. And lots of our members, our service users, say that that's really empowering for them. They feel like they're able to, in their own words, you know, explain how they've got there and really personalize their situation. There's nothing traceable back to Giulietta here, so we would never use surnames or locations or addresses. And if this was a particularly vulnerable individual, we would use an avatar and a pseudonym. So safety is, of course, very important to us. And then our supporters, as well as leaving donations, and there's donations of varying sizes, can also leave confidence boosting messages, which Giulietta can read and know that there are people out there who are really backing her. So I think my favourite one here is from Carol, who says, "Being a mum is a vitally important job. Well done for your focus and determination. Good luck for the future." And you can see Giulietta's gone through here and thanked each comment individually. So there's this real sense of a community getting behind her to get her back on her feet. And Giulietta, in return, can then leave updates, which are then sent to the supporters and they can then respond. So again, a real kind of community feeling. So this is her updating that she has started work as a carer. She's got a picture on her way to work here. And then here she is showing that she's moved into a new home. Her children now have a space to play. And she says, "To all my supporters, I'm so very grateful to you. There are not enough words to describe what I'm feeling. It's incredible how you turned my life around with your generosity." So that is the public-facing tech, and there are loads of examples and live examples as well of people that we're supporting right at this moment on our website, which I'll put the link into the chat after this. But I also wanted to show you our members hub. So this is some tech that we created specifically for our service users, and that was in response to the fact that most people have incredible access to amazing apps such as Uber and Airbnb and Deliveroo, which are designed to make our lives as friction-free as possible. But the the homeless cohort didn't have such access to this tech, so we wanted to change that. So this members hub is for any of our service users. We run weekly Get Connected sessions to make sure that those people who might not be so tech savvy can access this. You can access it on a phone or a laptop. It has upcoming appointments and tasks for each individual. They are WhatsApp integrated, so they'll get WhatsApps if they've got a group interview or if they've got a check-in coming up. They can book appointments with their caseworker here very easily. Again, WhatsApp integrated. They can see jobs that have been shortlisted for them based on the conversations they've had with their caseworker. So picking up what Amy said earlier, we really want to be digging into the individual skills and interests and then matching them with the employer, because we absolutely believe that these individuals can be an asset to the employers as well. So it's about matching the skill and interest with employer need. So this would be shortlisted roles. And then this, I think, is the most interesting part, is there is this community hub, which I suppose is a bit like a mixture between Facebook and LinkedIn. So it's a very safe way for our service users to be able to communicate with each other. There's nothing traceable, but they can post to each other and leave updates. So this is Charlie, who sent an update to say he's now working as a security guard. And someone like Asublu, who has just started out his campaign, can see, oh, wow, Charlie's already working. Or someone like Maria there's that peer representation, and they can really clearly see that there are individuals who have managed to get a job that they're really enjoying and sustain that as well. So we really want to be bringing that community together. But yes, I don't know if we've got time for questions, or I can answer questions at the end, but if anyone does want to get in contact, I'll pop the website and also my email in the chat. So always happy to answer any questions there.
Okay, thank you, Fiona. Fiona was our last speaker. So if people have questions for any of the speakers, we could take those now. I'd also like to hear any contributions that others on the call want to make, because it's not just about those we invited today, but equally we do want to have offers for people to speak at the next Secure Homes and Work Forum, which, given that we're about to get into the summer period, we'll meet again very early in September, and we'll get a date out later today. But anybody want to raise a hand? Okay, can't see any. So, oh yes, I can. So Tamina, would you like to come in?
Hello, I've just tried to put my camera on, so hopefully you can see me. I've mentioned this in the chat box. So, hi everyone, my name's Tamina. I'm in the best practice team at Crisis. And one of the things myself and my colleague Peter Harrison are working on is a best practice guide for employers. So the aim of this guide is to kind of target a whole range of employers, both kind of large and small organisations, and get them thinking around kind of what support offers they currently have for any prospective or current employees who are experiencing homelessness. So if anyone is interested in kind of hearing more about the guide or kind of sharing their kind of learnings, we'd be really keen to hear from you. So I'll pop both my and Peter's email into the chat box. In terms of dates, we don't have we're still in the process of kind of deciding when we're going to launch the guide itself. So it's very much a work in progress, but it would be really wonderful to hear from you all. And yeah, thank you to all the speakers today. It's been really, really insightful.
Okay, and perhaps I can ask if you would be prepared to come to the September meeting and talk about the guide. That would be really useful. So I'll pick that up separately with you. Thank you for that. John Blankley.
Yeah, good morning, Liz. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thanks to all the speakers. There was quite a few clear references to specialist employability support. And I think there was an earlier question in the chat specifically about how some of the activities being funded. And I know both Amy and Fiona have mentioned specific fundraising activity. Unfortunately, we've delivered youth homelessness services funded through the ESF model, which is clearly ending, with no clear guidance on what may or may not replace it. So I was just keen, and I appreciate, unfortunately, Victoria wasn't able to present, because I'd imagine some of their activity around the social housing engagement under UK SPF would have been quite a useful insight. But I'm just wondering if there are any other views from any of the people attending today on current engagement around authority-based UK SPF investment plans, and specifically the fact that people in skills strand is clearly 24-25, quite some time away. Appreciate that's probably quite a meaty question or comment I've posted, but I'd be very happy certainly to share my contact details, and if any organisations have got any guidance, feedback, thoughts, etc., that they're happy to share with our organisation, we'd appreciate it. Thanks, Liz.
Okay, what I would suggest is if you put your contact details in the chat, not only can people on this call get in touch with you, but I'll make sure you're invited to ERSA's next UK SBF event, where we are going to have a kind of a round table on where people are up to and compare experiences across sort of, you know, England, Scotland, Wales, North.
Excellent, thanks, Liz. I know we are linked with the communities that work groups as well on that. So yeah, I'll be happy. But yeah, I'll put the details in the chat. Thanks, Liz.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, so can I just talk about what sort of ERSA's thoughts are on next steps? We have had, we always had a housing forum. We changed it to a secure homes and work forum. We moved it from, you know, meetings in rooms in London to being online. And we have met regularly for the last 2 years when we were all at home and learning the new tech. But I think I really felt after I went to the meeting in February, which was a virtual round table, and then I went and met colleagues at St Mungo's and Beam and House of St Barnabas in April, did a little sort of catch up tour, seeing people in the flesh face to face again, that it was important to have this event today to kind of relaunch Secure Homes and Work. So we will be scheduling a meeting for early September. We're just checking some speaker availability. I've picked up on some of the things that have been mentioned today for future agenda items, and I'm quite keen on the idea of trying to get somebody from the DWP to come to a meeting to talk about the job centre advocacy work and how we could work with them so their work coaches are more informed about the discretion they can use. So that seems to me like something we could pick up on. I will ask St Mungo's and Entitled to if they could talk to us about building a bespoke calculator and the work they've done and what we could learn from that. Victoria Whittle from Clarion, I think would be really good to have back with us. And again, of course, I've just asked Crisis if they would come, but anybody who wants to speak at that or future sessions, please email events@ERSA. We will get out to everybody who's been here today the September date. We've got we've also, I think we had 75, 76 people at the height of this meeting, but we did have 150 register, and we do know that people pick up and look at recordings later. So I think what I'd like to think is that this event today is us building a really strong community of good practice around this topic. So the ERSA team will take it forward with your contributions. So I'd just like to thank everybody who spoke today. It's been really great. Somebody's asking, are there many local authorities here? I'm not sure because I only see names, not organisations, but we do have local authorities in ERSA membership, and I think we will encourage them to come to future meetings. ERSA is a membership organisation. As most of you will know, we are funded by our members' subscriptions. We also get some grant funding from the Youth Futures Foundation. But I think as we build things like this, we build like our communities of good practice, we do invite guests as well. So anybody that you think could contribute a benefit from this, please let them know about Secure Homes and Work. And I noticed that we've got Coventry City Council with us, so great. I think we need to pick up the conversation with some of our local authority members about how they want to participate and contribute in the future. Okay, anybody else want to say anything before we close? Oh, we've got Tameside, we've got all sorts of local authorities popping up in the chat, but otherwise thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your week. Look out for a date in September. And thank you to the speakers.